Welcome to the podcast. On this episode of the Failure Guide podcast, my guest is Dawn Meyer of Purple Dawn. Dawn, thank you for joining us, and welcome to the conversation.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Okay. So, Dawn, I'd like to before we get started, I'd like you to tell the folks who might be watching this on YouTube or listening to this on the podcast channel, tell them a little bit about yourself and your background.
Okay, what I do now is I am an energy healer and a Reiki master and a coach. So I help people to discover their possibilities. So I sometimes call myself a possibilities expert because it's helping them to see the possibilities that they didn't knew that existed or they'd given up on.
Okay.
And start asking what else would happen.
Okay. Now, before you got into that, though, you had a rather interesting career. I'd like to share a bit about that with the folks.
Okay, yes, I used to be a rocket scientist, meaning I worked on the Space Shuttle program for over 28 years.
Okay, and it's funny, we have the colloquial expression that it ain't rocket science, but in your case, sometimes it is.
Yes, I like to tell people that rocket science is seeing things that other people don't see, seeing things in a different way, seeing the other possibilities that exist, because if people didn't think about other things that don't necessarily exist for them right now, they'd never get anywhere and they'd never leave the Earth.
So, in other words, it's kind of a way for everyone to sort of take launch, if you will.
Exactly.
That's kind of fascinating because, I'll be honest with you. I hear it ain't rocket science and I think, oh, this is something incredibly complicated. It's beyond your realm. You can't handle this. But that's a rather interesting way of looking. It's like, no. Rocket science is just the possibility of you to explore your possibilities. So maybe it is a kind of a natural synergy that you've moved from what you did to what you're doing now.
And that's how I look at it. It's something I always wanted to do. And just being able to see those other possibilities in so many other areas of life, not just rocket science, not just rockets, but the energy work lets me see all those possibilities that not everybody realizes are there and start using them.
Okay. So before we get on into what you're doing now, how did you get into rocket science?
Well, when you asked me to be on here, you said, well, what was your biggest failure? And I got to thinking, what was my biggest failure? And I thought, I would say that what I looked at for many years, my biggest failure was that when I got out of college, I applied for this job at this big engineering firm. And it was going to be, a good gig. It was going to be a lot of money and a steady job. And I screwed up the interview.
Ooh.
But then what that turned out to give me was that year, then I was able to take Christmas off and go to Florida, apply to work at the space program, and I got the job. So it turned out to really be a good thing for me that I screwed it up.
Wow, you might say that was probably a very successful failure.
It was a very successful failure indeed.
Yes. So were you always interested in science? Was that something that came to you later in life? Tell us something
I
about
was,
that.
as a child, I was always interested in science. I was always interested in rockets. My parents used to get me up to watch the moon walks when I was a little kid. We'd get up in the middle of the night and watch it on the news. So it was always something I wanted to do. And when I got the chance, and again, another thing is I almost didn't apply for it because I didn't think I could qualify. And they said, what have you got to lose?
Wow.
And I said, yeah, what have I got to lose?
Yes.
I've already got another job, but this
Right.
is what I really would like to be doing.
Right. It's interesting. My mother used to have an expression that says, nothing beats a failure but a try.
There you go, exactly.
And it sounds like you're the perfect manifestation of that. Hey, why not? And in fact, so many things in my life, the career that I'm in was not my idea. What I was doing before that, which was attempting to be a musician down on the Jersey Shore in the 80s, it wasn't even my idea to play the instrument that I played. I met a guy at a summer camp, and he so persistently just convinced me that I should take up the bass guitar, which I'd never considered. But finally, I just listened to him telling me the story about the Grateful Dead and how they met their rhythm guitarist in college and taught him to play and formed a band which became the Grateful Dead. And he lived in New Jersey, on the Jersey Shore. I lived in Brooklyn, 60 miles away. And I was like, dude, I'm never going to see you again after this summer. But finally, I just thought, with his zeal and enthusiasm, I thought, well, why not? I'm 17 years old. What do I got to lose? Even if I
Yeah.
do this for a couple of years, I still won't even be 20, and then I'll move on to something else. Here I am at 63, and I'm still a bass player. So it's interesting. So now we go from, well, first of all, I'm fascinated personally. I've known you for a while, and we have connection beyond this podcast interview. But give us a little bit about your career during the Space Shuttle team. That's a fascinating thing. I mean, rocket science or no, very few people actually get to do that. So just give us a thumbnail sketch of your rocket science career.
So what I used to do on the space shuttle was I was a software engineer and I wrote software. I started out doing telemetry analysis from so that was what was being sent back from the space shuttle as to what it was doing. And then I would translate that so that the engineers could read it.
Okay.
And then I went from there to working on something called SCAN,
Hmm.
which was shuttle connector analysis network, which was what connectors, electrical connectors were connected and what the configuration was for the flight. And it was then what you had to do for the next flight and how to reconfigure it. And so I did that for a lot of years. And then eventually I ended up doing web pages and just whatever needed to be done. I just kept doing it.
Okay. So, speaking of failure, we're talking about the space shuttle. So, of course, you know there are two incidents that tend to come up.
Yeah,
Were
we
you
just
on
had
the?
Remembrance Day. So yeah, I was there the day that Challenger blew up. Now, I, of course, didn't see Columbia blow up because it blew up over Texas,
Right.
but I heard about it that morning when I was in my jazzercise class and we just closed class and left and went home. So yeah, and I remember actually I was very young, but I remember when the Apollo 1 fire was on because I remember it
Wow.
coming on to the broadcast that they interrupted everything with on television that night.
Okay. Wow.
So I remember all three.
Yeah. I either was too young or I don't remember the Apollo 1 fire. I know of it, of course. Now, I do remember staying up for hours at night when Apollo 13 was happening. And so I remember being very surprised when the Tom Hanks film came out because like, oh my gosh, that they're making a movie about this. Because I almost thought, is that a Mandela effect? Did I remember that properly? You know, because I remember and talking about that's something that's being referred to in the movie as one of NASA's most successful failures,
Yes.
because most of NASA and the world just wrote those guys off. You know, these are our first in space casualties, and you know the mission control team says no, not on our watch. We're going to bring those guys back. And
Yep.
it goes to show you how sometimes, you know, you can, you know, because I say failure is just what you don't expect. They expected to get to the moon. They didn't get to the moon, but they brought them back alive, and that was amazing. But you know, sometimes there are failures that, you know, that have calamitous events, but it teaches us. So, what would you say were NASA's takeaways from those two failures with the shuttle program?
With the shuttle program, our takeaways were changes in safety, changes in how many launches we were doing, and the preparation that everybody had because they were just pushing people too hard. So they needed to back off of it. And then safety on the vehicle and how it was being prepared. And of course, with the O-rings, it was to pay attention to the temperature
Mm,
because it was cold that morning and we
yeah,
never should have launched.
yeah. Well, of course, sometimes hindsight is 2020. But again,
Yeah.
we're not here to discuss grim and depressing things, but
Yep.
our Israel. So now we go from rocket science to Reiki master. Walk us through the transition from one career to the other.
Well, I had been doing the energy healing even when I was at the Space Center, but I wasn't doing it full time. I was just doing it, with friends and family and investigating it because it was something that fascinated me. Again, something that I had seen a lot of science fiction and a lot of um, that just totally mesmerized me. It's like, oh, I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to heal people with my hands.
Hmm.
And,
Okay.
because I'd seen that in movies and television, and it's like, oh, well, I can do that. So I started doing that. And then after we got to the end of the shuttle program, I decided not to stay. Now they wanted me to stay, but I said, no, I think I'm done. I've had enough of enough bureaucracy for a while.
So it wasn't the rocket science that you walked away from. You still found that fascinating, but of course, all things come with the infrastructure and all the mechanics of it, and that was what you said. You know what?
I'm
Yeah, I'm
working for the
good.
government. Yep. Because I still cover launches as a docent,
Yes.
so I do it for free now.
Okay.
It'd
Okay.
be nice if I still got that salary, but I
Yeah,
don't.
yeah. I was about to say, not that the money was a bad thing. The bureaucracy and all of that sort of mishigas was a problem. But I'm not mad at money.
That's right. I could do with the money if they'd give it to me, But so yeah, it was just that stuff fascinated me, and I was studying it. And then after I decided to take the layoff, I was thinking, well, how would I go about doing this now? Because I spent time meditating on the beach, and I spent time, going through my books and all of that sort of stuff. And somebody said, well, in Florida, you need to be able to have a license to touch people, so you need to become a massage therapist. It'd make it easier. And I thought, I don't want to be a massage therapist. So, of course, I went to massage therapy school and became a massage therapist. And
I don't want to do it. I don't
here I
want to do
am.
it. Well, here I am.
I don't want to, here I am. Yep. And I can do it. I don't do massage therapy much. I mostly do the energy work and the coaching because that's the part I really enjoy.
Okay. So do you use some of what you learned in massage therapy school in the rest of your practice?
Oh, yeah, I still do some of it because it's knowing where to apply energy, knowing where to apply touch. So I still use some of it. Mostly I use the stuff that I got in all of the different energy techniques because I know a lot of different ones, not just
Okay.
Reiki.
Okay.
And so it's knowing what the person's body is asking for
Right. Now
or what their being is asking for. Because I know that, yeah, you're going to go into woo-woo, aren't you?
who me? As you can see, folks, Dawn and I know each other quite well. But finish your thought before I get into that.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, and it is maybe, yes, people look at it as woo-woo, but again, I know it's possible and I just go with it.
Yes. Yes. Now, Dawn and I are in a leadership mastermind program and have been together for years. And now me, for those of you who know me outside of the Failure Guy podcast, I am a IT professional for the past 31 years. Systems administration, setting up servers, networks, and all that kind of stuff. So my world is bits and bytes and ones and zeros and on and off. And I like to think of myself as a very logical person. Of course, my favorite Star Trek character is Mr. Spock. And so to me, I always had the mindset that if I can't weigh it and measure it or graph it, then it isn't real. And actually, several years ago, the realization came to me that I had it backwards. That before we ever had a kilometer or a millimeter or a microgram, we had thoughts and feelings and emotions and energy. And all these measurements is an attempt to describe the indescribable, measure the immeasurable, and touch the intangible. So my world is actually the world that's invented and fabricated and made up. The real world is real. What quantum physicists discovered when they looked inside the electron microscope is that there's no there there. They were expecting to see some tiny little pebble spinning around other tiny little pebbles, some indivisible thing, and they said, no, it's just a wave. And if you split it, it's just a wave. And if you split it, it's just a wave.
It's just energy. Everything is.
Yes, because E equals MC squared, like I say, sorry folks, going to go into a little math here. If you solve for M, which is matter, is E over C squared. So if energy is really, really, really fast mass, all matter is really, really slow energy. So it is all energy. And still there's a part of my brain that finds it hard, I'm not going to lie, finds it hard fitting that in. But one thing that I know as a scientifically minded person is that when you see the evidence that's incontrovertible, it doesn't matter if you can explain it or define it. Is what is, deal with it.
Yeah.
You know?
Because sometimes you just can't explain it and it's just go with it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So now I'm assuming that most people that come to you are down with the program, so to speak. They're into the concept of energy healing. But do you ever get any clients who have a bit of reluctance or reticence at first?
Yes, I do. I get
Okay.
people who don't believe in it and they'll say, well, how do I know that it's going to work? And I'll say, well, basically, what you do is think of where you are now and maybe write down some things. And then after we do this session, give it a few days and see where you are then.
Hmm.
Because I had my one friend that said, well, they never worked for me. And I said, all right, let me ask you this. Before we did the session a week ago, you were not going to your workouts because you didn't wasn't worth it. But now you are. That's a change.
Hmm.
You suddenly decided that you wanted to do it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I point these things out to people. And I had my one of my clients that she wrote down this whole list of things. And she said, I don't even remember a lot of those now because so much has changed. And I said, well, exactly, because you're not that person who wrote that down. You're
Hmm.
somebody different now,
Hmm.
and you
Okay.
see life differently.
Okay. So it's not necessarily some major, amazing, wicked transformation, flash of light, and suddenly, like, turning into Shazam or ISIS or something like that.
It can be, but I don't get to do that very often,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
But you're saying it can sometimes occur a bit, you know, not instantly transformative. This is not a television show, but you can have serious transformation in a short number of sessions.
Yes, you can.
Okay, well, talk to us about some of that.
Well, sometimes you have where you let go of something that you've held on to for so long that it just starts changing everything in your life. Because once you change the energy of something, you change what it is and how it looks and how it shows up.
Hmm. Hmm.
So if you let go of this thing that you've held on to, and maybe you've had it for as anger for so long, because one of my clients came in and she was so angry at somebody, and I said, okay, well, let's go with that. And we worked on helping her let that go, and she couldn't even really, she said, I can't even remember what I was angry about now. And I said, well, that's great. Don't worry about it. Don't try to figure it out. Just let it go and be grateful that you let it go.
Hmm. Okay, now that's fascinating because you said at the start of our conversation that you look at possibilities, and that's where you kind of see the natural connection between rocket science and everything else, basically, because rocket science, after all, is like we have the potential to get from this rock floating in space to another rock floating in space or just into orbit, and of course we know in energy the difference between potential energy, a rock sitting at the top of the mountain, and kinetic energy, the rock rolling down the mountain. And so possibilities for people, I guess, are just looking at or looking at possibilities is moving from one energy state to another,
Yeah,
would you say?
I would say that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Because people sometimes don't even think that something is possible because they've had some other thing going on in their life for so long that they think that that's the way life is now.
Right.
And yet
Right.
there's another possibility that exists if they're just willing to look for it and ask the universe to help them find it.
Sort of like the old saw that, whether you tell yourself you can or you can't, you're right.
You're always right. Yeah.
you know. Now, I am a firm believer, despite what I said earlier about the woo. I believe that a lot of illness and cancers, even cancers in particular, come from a manifestation of internalized negative energy. When we bundle of frustration, aggravation, anger, resentment, I think that physically manifests itself into energy which mutates these cells and causes this catabolistic response in where our body starts consuming itself. So I would guess that the nature of your work is, among other things, exposing people to the possibility that they can change their approach, their attitudes, and their own internal energy states, and thus transform themselves.
Yes. Because, yeah, a lot of things are just that they have chosen to be a certain way and look at life a certain way, and that negativity sometimes builds up and manifests itself, creates itself as some sort of dysfunction in the body. And so once you start unraveling that, sometimes you can change it. Sometimes you can actually eliminate it, but I never tell people that you can, that I promise that, because I don't. I
Right.
can't.
Right.
They have to choose how they're ready to change their lives.
Right. And again, I get back to my definition of failure as I think that, especially listening to what you just said, a lot of things are perspectives. Like okay, here's a failure of mine. Not to brag or anything, but when I was a kid, I was pretty much my strong suit was my intellect. I was the top kid in my grade from third grade to middle school. And it was just, foregone conclusion. There was me, and then there was number two through last. In the end of junior high school, which was ninth grade, because I chose to be a senior in junior high school rather than a freshman in high school, I was passing by the office of the school one day, and I heard talk that there was a possibility of another kid who might be a potential valedictorian as opposed to me, which I just took as a lot. Not from arrogance, but just I was always the smartest kid in the grade, so yeah, of course. And that shook me, that knocked the wind out of me, to the point that I ended up being third in my class. I was not valedictorian or even salutatorian. And I visited my junior high school after I graduated, and one of the people in the office said, "Cornell, I don't know what happened. You were right on track to be valedictorian, and then, like the last semester, it's like you stopped trying."
Yeah.
Because I told myself, "Oh my gosh, maybe I can't do this." And again, what you tell yourself is what is real. Now had I never heard that, or had I heard that and said, yeah, you know, hold my milk, hold my chocolate milk, or or whatever, and just kept on going at the rate I was going, and I obviously I felt bad about that. Of course, nowadays, that was 1973. That's a long time ago. Nobody remembers or cares, but for a long while, I carried that with me as a failure of, see, this is what you could have done, and you would have, could have, should have, blah, blah, blah. But now I look at it and just think, well, that's a life lesson of don't tell yourself negative thoughts or limiting beliefs. Because it really just shows me when I find myself doing that, and it's like, we're not doing that again.
Yeah. Because, yeah, it is, you create your life. So if you've decided that you are no longer the top of the class, well, you're not. Because now you've decided somebody else is that, and you rearrange your life to let that be the truth.
Yes. Now I find it fascinating that I have someone who's been both in such a hard science field as working on the space shuttle program and having an engineering background, to someone who's into energy healing, healing by touch, Reiki mastery, and all of that. Because it kind of synthesizes two worlds that a lot of people tend to think, including me before I met you, as kind of diametrically opposed. But when we say things like, you are the author of your destiny, you write your own story, what you believe you can receive. And let's be honest, a lot of that sounds like magical thinking or wishful thinking, or just a bunch of what I used to call woo-woo nonsense. But as you have seen from your practice, and as I have seen from just opening my mind and looking at the world, that's true, but it's not just wish fulfillment. This is the thing that I think, especially in knowing you, that a lot of people tend to misunderstand. Because it's not, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's not just, all I got to do is sit here and think happy thoughts and things will happen for me. That's not what you're talking about, is it?
Right. You still have to have action. Because
Right.
you can sit here and think happy thoughts all day long, which may or may not change enough to create what you would like to have. So
Right.
you've got to start taking steps toward those actions.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
I can't, that's why people say, well, can't you tell me how long it's going to take for this to happen? I said, that's up to you.
Mm. Mm. Okay. So you can kind of be their guide, but you can't take the steps for them.
I cannot take the steps. Kind of like in the Matrix, Morpheus says, I can only show you the door, you have to open it,
Right.
or you have to go through it.
Right. Right. And this
Because
is
yes, I can show you that the door is there, but you're the one that has to go through it, not me.
yes. And in keeping with the theme of our conversation in this podcast, it's just coming to me as we're having this conversation that what happens to a lot of people is simply that failure to take the action. Not that the possibility isn't there, and as you said earlier, and I'd like you to get into that a little more, of you work with and I think what's the term that you use yourself, a possibility.
Possibilities expert.
Yes, because it isn't that the possibility isn't there, but if you fail to act upon the possibility, well, first of all, if you fail to acknowledge that the possibility is there at all, and you can get to a point where you see it, but as you said, you don't act upon it, then that's where you experience the failure to achieve what you aspire to. It's not that it wasn't available to you, it's not that it wasn't possible, but simply contemplating the possibility isn't enough.
Right. And then you also have to realize that sometimes acknowledging that the possibility is there or that part of the possibility is there really helps move you along too, because some people think, well, I wanted a green car, but I got a blue car, so I didn't get what I wanted. Well,
Mm,
you got a car.
right.
It's just a different color.
This is true.
Don't you want to acknowledge and say thank you, that car showed up? Now, if you want to really need the color that you asked for, well, go out and get it painted.
I was about
But
to
you've
say that. Sure,
got,
you can always change the color, but hey,
yeah,
you got a car and you're complaining. Look at that guy walking down the street. Okay,
exactly.
so come on, and that reminds me of an incident, one of those things in life that really sticks with me. And I mentioned that I was attempting to be a musician in my 20s, and as you can see by the videos of mine that you've never seen and the albums of mine you've never seen in the record stores. Yes, folks, we're old enough to remember time when there were record stores. Look it up. Ask your parents. So now I'm 31. My musical career has come to nil. I'm actually on public assistance in Monmouth County, New Jersey. And they're paying for me to go to the local community college because I'm like, I've had enough of this poverty. I got to get out of here. Now, the thing was, they paid for everything, registration, books, the tuition. They paid for everything except transportation. And I lived 13 miles away from where the community college was. So a friend of mine who was a professional bicycle racer got a sponsor and got a new super duper, alloy, lightweight, clip removable, everything. So he gave me his old bike, which was an amazing bike. Even back then it retailed for over $1,000. And so I rode the 13-mile distance back and forth 4 days a week to get to school. So now it's summertime. So you can imagine it's been summertime and I've biked over hill and over dale, and I've arrived after a 13-mile bike trip, and I'm locking up the bike. I am literally dripping a ring of sweat on the pavement around myself. I'm looking at the parking lot. Here I am at 31. I'm seeing these teenagers get out of the cars that their parents bought them for high school graduation, and I'm about to send out the engraved invitations to the pity party, when all of a sudden, to my right, I hear the whir of a mechanical engine. And I turn and I look, and coming up the ramp is a gentleman in a motorized wheelchair, which he is steering by blowing into 3 pneumatic tubes. One for forward, one for left, one for right. Next to his head is a dowel with a sponge on it, and across the arms of the wheelchair is a tabletop that has the 26 letters of the alphabet and the 10 digits. And obviously, to communicate, this guy has to grab this dowel and point to the letters to spell out. So this guy is not only a quadriplegic, he is also mute. And at that point, I'm not a particularly religious man, as you know, but I looked up and I said, okay, I get it. Don't have to hit me with another brick. Because 13 miles, what would that guy have traded to pedal 13 cranks on that bicycle to move under his own aspiration? And there was no one with him. He was not feeling, he was going to class. Okay? So at that moment, and whenever I find myself starting to get into that, call the ambulance, wah, poor me, I go back to that. Now, if I'm writing a screenplay, I would never have written that scene because it would seem too, oh, right. At the moment he's feeling sorry for himself, this happens. Come on, that's too Deus Ex Machina. But that is a true story. That actually happened to me. And again, that's kind of, I guess, if you really want to think about it, where I started seeing the, because, I mean, really, at that particular moment, this guy's not a guy on crutches, but this extreme scenario, and so I realized that we got to look at the possibilities. And as friends of mine, and even I've told this story hundreds of times, but recently somebody says, hey, you were healthy enough to bike 26 miles a day, 4 days a week. And I was like, wow. I was just looking at this as a humbling moment. It's like, yeah, that's a marathon a day, 4 days a week. And I was fit enough to do that. So that's another way, rather than poor, pitiful me. I was not, because not for nothing, I came back to New York starting my IT career, and I was in amazing shape. I was also incredibly thin, but but I was really in good, vigorous shape, because that was, some people, and think of it, some people pay money to go to a gym to sit on a make-believe bike and pedal for miles. And that was just what there was for me to do 4 days a week to try to explore my possibilities. And here's the ironic thing. After the first semester was over, I didn't even finish the 2 years, because my cousin, who contacted me to get me my first IT job, contacted me. And like I said, the second time I dropped out of college was to start my first computer job on Wall Street. Yeah. So possibilities are there, and it's in how we look at things. Now, since the nature of our conversation is the failure guide, but we're looking at failure as simply part of the process, have there been any clients or customers or experience you've had who may have looked at things at a particularly from a failure perspective that in your working and coaching with them turned around their perspective, where they could see that this was simply an experience that they had to go through to get to where they were going?
I would say yes, there are. And there are people who have refused to do that. But, I have had people who, even after the first session, they said, I never realized that I could look at life like this again.
Wow.
And I thought, wow. And I said, well, you're welcome. I never saw them again, but whatever they got out of it was so profound when they told me that they were good with what they had, and they were able to move forward again. Because he was in a lot of depression when he came in. And I've had, a friend of mine came in, and I didn't realize she was contemplating suicide that day.
Oh my gosh.
And I worked on her, and it was several days later, she said, I just wanted you to know that I was thinking of killing myself after I left, before I got to see you. She said, and then I changed my mind.
Wow.
And I said, well, thank you so much for letting me know that. I'm glad you did.
Yes, because it would have been horrible to get to find out the other way. Yeah. Oh my goodness! But that, I mean, just take a moment for that. That's got to be. Okay. Sorry for the noise. I don't know if you can hear the car horns, but we are here. I am here in Harlem, New York, and New York City is loud. So if you hear the extraneous background noises, folks, that's life. But anyway. That's got to be, I mean, both someone who's a one and done, so to speak, but they get such a profound transformation out of it. And we were talking earlier that there's no Shazam kind of moment, but I guess sometimes there are.
There is. Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. And for someone, I mean, that's pretty severe. I unfortunately have friends and colleagues who have, experienced, suicide of a loved one. In their lives. And I find it kind of interesting that as a society we've become so sensitive that, have you noticed, like in news reports, they don't even want to use the word suicide anymore? There seems to be this reluctance. I mean, it's a thing that happens. It's tragic, of course, but it happens. This is the thing that happens. But for someone to have a session with you and then to share that with you, that's got to be a profoundly moving experience for you, as well as it is for that person who, of course, decides not to take a permanent solution to a temporary situation.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. And so you say that there is also the converse of that. There are the folks who don't move past the failure. Of course, hopefully that is a rare occurrence, but I'm sure that happens sometimes as well.
Yeah, because sometimes they're just not willing to make a change. They think that this is what it is and it's going to be this forever.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And so
yeah,
much of it, and this is a thing, and this is why I've decided to relaunch this podcast. A lot of it's more than we know, more than I think we'll ever realize, is from our perspective, is from how we look at things. And again, not to bring the mood down in the room, but I am the descendant of slaves. My great grandmother was a sharecropper. Her parents were someone's property. You know, her daughter, my grandmother, was a multiple property owner. My uncles, my grandmother's sons, were entrepreneurs and multiple business owners. My mother was a property owner, a ordained Baptist evangelist, and one of the most powerful influences in my life, as you well know. I am a self-taught IT professional that worked my way up from what I knew about Unix was how to spell it, to having my last full-time job was a six-figure salary, where I was IT manager for an architectural design firm that had Steven Spielberg, Jerry Seinfeld, the United Nations, and Yale University as private clients. You know, so I always trace that back to my great great grandparents, none of whom I knew anything about or any of their names, because they must have seen the possibility of me. They didn't know what the lineage would be or what my name would be or what the conditions under which I lived, but they saw a time when life for them and people like them and for their descendants and offspring was not going to be like it was now. And to me, that is the most profound example of looking at the possibilities and not at the situation and circumstance, and firmly believing it's not. Obviously, it's not wishful thinking. Wishful thinking doesn't take shackles off of your wrists and ankles, but living profoundly into that possibility can have echoes through generations and across time.
yep,
Yeah.
yes, because people saw that there were different possibilities that were available,
Yes.
and they believed that they could change it, or that
Yes.
someone could change it for them, and they could be part of it.
Yes. And there's always hopeful. Well, no, there's always hope. There's always hope, and I think it's very important. That's why I'm so glad to have you as a guest here on the podcast, because it's something. It's the sort of thing that it can be easily dismissed. Ah, yeah, that's those granola eating, tree hugging,
Tree huggers, yeah.
incense burning, woo woo, airy fairy types. But it is really a real thing. I mean, I think it's as real as therapy, because the couch trip, as people say. What is that? There's a bunch of people talking to each other, but what are they doing? They can change people's lives by these conversations. And at the end of the day, what are they doing? They're exploring, they're looking at what was, they're looking at what is, and they're considering the possibilities. They just have a different methodology that they use as their approach, but in a lot of ways, it can end up being a similar result, when applied successfully.
Yeah, it can be because it there are a lot of different ways. There are a lot of paths that lead to the mountain, even if there's only one mountaintop.
Hmm. Hmm. I like that. I like that. You know.
So yeah,
Um, so
and
in your storied career, both in obviously in rocket science, working for the shuttle, and now what you're doing with the energy healing and possibility expert, would you say there are any standout moments in your many years of doing both things that you'd like to share with our audience here?
well, I'd say that the one standout moment was when my friend said she didn't commit suicide.
Okay,
That was a big
that's for
one.
real.
And then there have been other standout moments for me personally in things that have shifted in my life that I've been able to change and move into something different. So, like when I said I wasn't going to become a massage therapist, well, that was another stepping stone. So
Hmm.
I took that stepping stone to the next thing that I wanted, which was to open a center. And then a friend of mine opened it with me, and then she decided to leave. So then it was mine. So
Okay.
there've just been all these things that have moved along in different modalities that I've learned that have really been things that have really shifted what my life was like.
Okay. Well,
And
your center. Tell us a little bit about that.
well, I had, which I do not have anymore,
Hmm.
a center
Okay.
where I did my teaching and I did my energy sessions for people. And I used to have classes there all the time. Now I rent a room to do that and rent centers to do my classes because I teach the Reiki classes and other energy techniques.
Okay. So what was it that was it the pandemic shutdown? What was it that?
No, it was actually the hurricane.
Right. You're in Florida. I
I
keep
live in
forgetting because
Florida,
I'm there.
yeah. So I had one too many leaks into the building that I was renting,
Hmm.
and the last hurricane that we had, I just said that's it, because the whole back wall leaked,
Oh my gosh.
and it got mold on my massage table and on my bookcase and all sorts of things, and it's like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
At
Yeah. Okay.
least with this facility, and if I find another one, fine, and if I don't, well, I'll just find something else because I just am tired of
Right.
the water and
The
the
upkeep and
upkeep,
the
yeah.
structural failures, if you will.
Structural failures, yeah.
Yes. Okay. But again, you persist and you keep on, despite those things, because those are mere setbacks. Those aren't a failure of your business. That's just a failure of the edifice. And it's like, okay, so you explore new possibilities.
Yep. Just ask for the next one that is the right one for me to show up.
Okay. Okay. Now I find it interesting. You've mentioned several times about your becoming a massage therapist, despite your reluctance. So, kind of walk us through Dawn at this point of time of like, I don't want to get massage therapy. I don't want to get this thing to becoming a massage therapist anyway. What was that journey like?
Well, that journey was that, I needed to get a license to touch people because that's what the Department of Health requires in Florida. And I was thinking of different things I could get, different ones I could get. And I went, they said, well, just come down and talk to us at the massage school. My friends who had gone to this particular school said, well, just go talk to them. And so I went down there and of course I signed up.
Hmm.
And and they let me start a month late and make up the time.
Okay.
And so I only had to do 5 months instead of 6. And it all worked out.
Okay. Okay. And again, pardon me. Again, you were open to the possibility.
Yes, I was open to the possibility that this may be what needs to be done.
Okay. Okay.
And it
That's
was.
so that seems to be the underlying theme of our conversation is exploring the possibilities. And again, we've known each other for years, but this was really the first time that I heard you draw the comparison and connection between the rocket science and the energy healing. That
Mm.
it's all about exploring possibilities and opportunities. Because of course, a century and a half ago, people were saying if man was meant to fly, he'd have been given wings. And we not only went to powered flight here inside the atmosphere, but actually left the atmosphere. Now there are several permanent stations in low Earth orbit.
Yeah,
And,
because we had to build our own wings.
yeah. And we're sitting out there because people said, okay, if this was going to happen, what we have to do? And they just considered the possibilities. Some of them, like watching those early 1900s attempts to build an airplane, you're not going to build a bunch of wings and flap your arms. It's not going to work like that.
Well, it didn't work, but somebody tried it because, well, you just find things that don't work and you
Well,
go on to the next one.
you had to explore that possibility. It's like, well,
Yeah,
that's not it. Let's try something else. You
yeah.
know, and then getting and it's kind of interesting, and I consider this like a not a failure of the technology, but a failure of the spirit of man. That our rocket technology came out of ballistic rocketry from World War II, which
Yeah.
was war. You know, and sometimes our most destructive tendencies end up yielding possible peaceful possibilities. I mean, that it is what it is. That's the history. We weren't trying to reach the moon or get off of the planet. One country was trying to drop bombs on another country that was far away. And, then after that, they says, okay, this war thing, I don't know about that, but maybe we put a little more energy, change the trajectory. Could we reach escape velocity? I wonder. And then they did. And of course, that was a competition of, macho guys trying to bump chests. Comrade, we will get to space. And oh no, we can't let them beat us. And, and a thing that I find interesting, talking about failures, and this is a thing that a lot of people don't know. And despite the fact that this was, and I think, was it 1973 was Apollo 13? Whatever particular year it actually was. Yeah. So this is the height of the Cold War. Soviet Union and the United States are at enmity with each other. But when that event occurred, the Soviet Union reached out to the United States and said, whatever we can do to help those astronauts, we will do. We're here for you. Because at the end of the day, it just came down to our common humanity. And sometimes it takes a tragic event like that, or something extreme, for us to put aside all that political nonsense and all that posturing and realizing, wait a minute, because they had cosmonauts, they got out there first, and like, man, if our guys were stuck out there, we would want everybody that was possible to lend a hand and help us. And so, yeah, we're here, whatever we can do. Whether you need telemetry or access to, our satellites, whatever, we got you. And that is in another way for me why that was a very successful failure. Not only because NASA and those astronauts in there, and talk about engineering, they had to do a lot of the math in their head to do things and steer things manually in order to get themselves back. So yay, science and math. But it brought the world together through that failure. Had it been successful, it would have just been another, brinksmanship episode. But by the catastrophe and by failing to achieve their objectives, it actually brought humanity together a little closer. And these are the things that I think, and again, shifting our perspectives and changing the way that we look at things. Was it a failure? For example, as I shared with you, and full disclosure for those of you watching this, I did an interview yesterday with a mutual colleague of myself and Dawn's, and everything went perfect. I'm recording this to my local computer. I'm live streaming this to YouTube simultaneously. I'm doing all of these transitions and shifting the scenes back and forth, as you see, and everything went great, except I forgot to do a sound check, and my guest's audio was muted for the entire interview. So it's an hour of me talking over here, and then in that box over there, there's a silent movie going on. Her lips are moving. So, of course, we're going to reschedule that interview. So one of the things that we did was Dawn and I did a sound check. And in fact, we actually had to do a couple of takes before we got everything right in order to record this interview that you guys are watching and listening to now. So, again, as I said, well, it's kind of on message. I'm obviously not going to try to fail at something every episode, but it's just first attempts in learning. What I learn is make sure that you have everything in sync when you want to live stream and record at the same time. Make sure you do a sound check to make sure both participants' voices can be recorded, or you're going to have spent an hour that's going to be completely unuseful. And also always prepare. And so as we draw things to a conclusion, Dawn, are there any final thoughts you have? Anything you want to share with the folks who are going to be watching this or listening to this?
Well, I like people to think about their failures or what they consider to be failures and realize that it may have just cleared the way for something better to show up. So it was just something you had to get done and get out of the way, and now you can move on to something even better than what you thought was available.
That is amazing. That's a perfect summary of things. I like that. I'm going to take that on myself, and I'm glad. So folks, really, couldn't put any better. Couldn't put any better advice myself. I'm going to pop up here on the screen your contact info, so people can see. Oh, and I'm realizing I've had that up the whole time. This is who you are. I was like, let me put up your contact info. No. And again, This is what was supposed to be up there most of the time, and I was supposed to pop up your contact info at the end. So now you can see who you've been talking to all the time. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I have certainly been on message for the Failure Guy podcast. This has been Dawn Meyer of Purple Dawn, and as you can see, her website is iampurpledawn.com. Her email address is dawn at iampurpledawn.com. You know, this is who she is. One of these days, I'm actually going to not experience some level of failure. But despite that gaffe, it has been a very excellent interview and conversation. And let me put up my information. This is me. You can see all of the podcast episodes and get links to the YouTube channel at thefailureguy.org. And my email address is the very complex Cornell Green at Commune IT Solutions. That is my company here, 21st Century CommuneITSolutions.com. And so this has been a wonderful conversation. I'm glad that you've stuck with me despite all of the hiccups and hitches and glitches and technical difficulties. And thank you for having this marvelous conversation with me, Dawn, and sharing your insights to the world and just opening them up to the fact that all possibilities are possible, and it's just a matter of them shifting their perspective and changing their attitude, and they can see and attain new possibilities.
Thank you very much.
Yes. And to those of you out there in podcast land, I'd like to remind you to remember that failure is always just not attaining the things that you expected. So sometimes all you have to do is shift your perspective on what you expect. Feet if you quit. So remember, keep running, never quit. And I'll see you guys again on the next episode of The Failure Guy.